Hi, my name is Lowell Joseph Gallin, and Dr. Sam, move over this way a little bit. I got to
Sure.
get you in the camera's view. And this is Dr. Sam Minskoff. Dr. Sam, thank you for being our guest again on the new internet TV talk show, the Laura and Lowell Show. We are filming our Love Israel with Laura and Lowell interview series while I am here in the land of promise. And Dr. S, I'll call myself now Professor L, is interviewing Dr. S about psychology and psychology-related issues. And Dr. Sam Minskoff is what I would call a combat psychologist with experience in Los Angeles with very rough cases where he worked with the Los Angeles City Police Department. We discussed that in a previous interview. He's used to dealing with people in extreme circumstances, and what do you do to help them? Today's subject will be trauma therapy. Specifically, what do you do when you get hit with I don't even know what the word for it is, Frankenstorm, Megastorm, Superstorm, a new category, Sandy, like hit New York, which is Dr. Sam's city and mine. Well, a lot of it isn't there anymore. It was underwater. And people, where we'd go walking, you need a canoe or to go whitewater rafting. And we're going to be discussing trauma therapy, especially for me, for a group of people that mean a lot to me. I call Lowell's kids at NYU in the New York Film Academy, which took a bath. And kids are sleeping on cots in the Kimmel Center at NYU. And the Langone, I think it's called Medical Center, hundreds of people had to be evacuated, and thousands of mice got drowned. And in Chelsea, where the art galleries are, in fact one which is making a documentary film, my first non-student film, which is nearing completion, have damage estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. What do you do? Trauma therapy. So Dr. Sam and I are going to be talking about when you've experienced something like that and it's not over. Then at the beginning of this week, the temperatures went down below freezing, and people don't have fuel supplies. And today, Wednesday, November 7th, another storm is coming. If you're not scared out of your wits, you should be. So what do? Dr. Sam, you're talking to frightened, terrified students, their teachers, their administrators, citizens of New York, homeless people. What would you, if you were in New York working with Mayor Bloomberg now, and you had to provide trauma therapy to New Yorkers on the front lines in a blitz situation, what do you do?
Well, what do you do? Well, the first thing you do is that I know the first thing that comes to mind is that people say, well, don't panic, which is kind of ludicrous, easier said than done. But here it is. You've got millions, 8 million people at least. That used to be the popular. I don't know, when I was coming up, I'm not giving my age away, but that used to be the population of New York City was 8 million. The thought of it, their homes were swept away, were gone. You lose everything, and everything in an instant. The shock, the loss, and also human life. People lost their lives, and now their loved ones are not only traumatized by the storm, but also now traumatized by grief and loss. So what do you do? Well, the first thing you got to understand, what we acknowledge, is that as soon as the trauma happens, a lot of times people go numb. There's like a numbness, which is a good thing, because if our minds were able to experience every little thing consciously and in multicolored detail, you would implode or explode, one of the two. You go nuts. You go numb. And some people the first step in the adjustment is denial. So they go into a state of denial, which is an integral part of the healing process. So this is where we're at with something like this. Some may be kind of understanding and getting used to what's going on, and now another storm is coming. It's like, my goodness, it's like putting...
Let's stop there for a minute, Dr. Sam. You just said the state of denial is actually, if it's at the right time in the right place, something positive that's part of the healing process?
It's part of the healing process. Now,
if you don't stay there. You're not supposed to be in a state of denial forever.
It's a stage.
It's a stage.
It's a phase.
As long as it's a phase.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So New York just got a baseball bat in the face, and a lot of people are numb in a state of Non-recognition denial. That's
Shock.
shock. That's an important.
Shock.
That's good.
Right.
If it's just a stage.
Right.
What happens next?
But you know, how long is the stage is, again, it's up to the individual. It depends. There are stages and phases, and nobody's really written the authoritative book on exactly how long it should be. But if it's going on decade after decade and getting in the way of your life, and you're not getting beyond that point, which is definitely understandable, it could be a problem. You know, there's nothing wrong with enjoying life, whatever it is in the world for us, and being blessed in this world. That's perfectly okay. If these things are getting in the way of that, then it's a good idea to look into it. So you look into the denial phase. See, this is part of, there was a psychiatrist, Dr. Kubler-Ross. You know, she dealt with the issues of death and dying.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Right. And she talked about, again, death and dying, loss, trauma. She dealt with terminal, patients. The first one is denial. Then there's anger. You're just angry about what happened. And then there's bargaining. Gee, now if I had done this or if I've done that, well, if I do this, somehow it's kind of like in the denial phase, because bargaining is as if you have some control and you can do something about it. Okay? Then there's depression. The reality crashes. It sets in. Loss, depression. Now this could be a real bear. This could go on for years and years. Okay? Then acceptance, and then a peace with it. Okay. Now the problem is when we're dealing with grief, loss, no matter how profound, there's always this phrase that goes through our mind, when am I going to get over this? When do we get? Well, get over it. That's the expression. You get over it. There are some things you don't get over. You get over a cold. You don't get over, let's say, God forbid, a loss of a spouse or a child, God forbid, or a loved one or someone that close. Yes, it depends on the kind of relationship you've had. But when you have attachments like that, a great loss, you don't get over it, you get through it. You accept, or you learn to create a new normal. Things will never be the same. This is true. It will never be the same ever. It doesn't mean it can't be better, but it'll certainly be different. So it's getting from the transition of letting go of the old and accepting accepting the new, which may not be so terrible in the long run. It's so easy to talk now, and this probably sounds absolutely silly because we're right in the thick of what's going on in New York, which is mega traumatic.
And we're both New Yorkers,
Yeah.
And we never saw anything like this growing up. Where'd you grow up in New York, Dr. Sam?
I grew up in Manhattan, and I remember...
On the Upper East Side, right?
On the Upper East Side, and I remember one season we were sitting in school, I was in grade school, there was a hurricane. I think it was Hurricane Cleo at the time. And we were sent home for fear of. But really, it was basically a lot of winds, a lot of rain, and it was the biggest break ever to get out of school early. It was wonderful. But nothing. I mean, they make movies about this.
Yeah, like Roland Emmerich's The Day After Tomorrow, which came out a few years ago, which this is on the road to being a historical reenactment of on a smaller scale. And who knows what's coming next month. Because these storms, Irene in the summer, missed New York at the last minute, veered away, but destroyed entire communities in upstate New York and struck parts of New England that had never been struck before. We watched that on TV. Was I in New York at the time or was I here? Either way, I watched it on TV, and it wasn't in it. This time, it didn't veer away. And it could have been a lot worse, relatively speaking. So you grew up on the Upper West Side.
Right.
Upper East Side.
Upper East Side, yeah.
And I grew up, assuming I grew up, in Elmsford, New York, between White Plains and Tarrytown, which more or less in the Hudson Highlands, people lost power but didn't get hit the way Manhattan and the boroughs did. So we never saw anything like this, except in fantasy films from Hollywood, which are now coming real. Now let's get back to trauma therapy. You have been discussing trauma therapy for an event that passed, such as, you'd say you were in the Holocaust and the Nazis are defeated and there's the day after. But the day after didn't come yet in New York because it's still happening. What do you do as trauma therapy when you're in the middle of the trauma and it's not done. It's finished yesterday. It's still unfolding. Who knows what will be next week? How do you deal with that then? You talked about a denial phase and the anger phase and the depression phase. What kind of phases do people go through when it's hitting you day after day, week after week? You know what's coming the week after that?
It's a great question. Because what do you do before, the pre-therapy? As it happens, what do you do? So, it's not something that I think is best for one individual to do when you're dealing with something like this. You would need a team to get in there. The best thing to do, it's when something is out of control, there's the trauma, you don't know what's going to happen, you don't even know how people are going to react. Some people never really had a trauma of really any kind, maybe minor, but nothing of this. You never know how a person is going to react. So it's best to, especially if there's pre-warning about a storm, to have people, if I was talking to the mayor, Your Honor, to have people on call and to be there on the scene when the trauma hits, and it's going to hit. So be on the scene and to contain it in such a way as to make sure that people are as safe as possible. It's almost like when night terrors in children, okay, which is again they say it's just like a sleepwalker. You don't disturb a sleepwalker. You don't try to do anything to the sleepwalker because there's something else that's going on. Night terrors are very similar. It's in the somnambulistic family, like a sleep disorder family. It's natural. It occurs like between ages of 3 to 5, maybe extends it to 7. And usually when there's some transitional or developmental, even perhaps traumatic thing that's going on. What do you do when a kid is in a state of trauma, is in a night terror? There he or she is doing. What do? And you don't do anything. You let it run its course, because you don't know what to do. You got the therapeutic thing to do is to let it run its course. That person has enough inside of them to keep themselves together. Now, you're on hand because to keep them safe. If they start frailing, or they start running into things, or they start destroying or hurting themselves unwittingly, that is what we're on hand for, to keep them from doing that, to keep them safe from the experienced or the perceived terror. But at this point, you let it run its course. The smoke settles or the dust settles, and we see what's left, and then that's what we deal with in terms of counseling.
Would it be useful to, let's say, for the mayor's office, he has the fire department and the police department and the various offices of social services, to look for ways to get people involved in doing something to keep them busy? For example, these marathon runners came to New York, no marathon, so 1,000 of them went to Staten Island, if I'm not mistaken, and brought the supplies to help people. Assuming that could be organized, because when you're in the middle of Noah's flood, minor version, you may not be able to organize anyone to do anything. Just stay off the streets on higher floors and try to keep warm. But would organizing people in New York to help other people be a good way to keep their mind off their troubles? And we all feel better when we do good things for other people. I think that's universal constant all over the world.
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. It's a community thing. Or it should be. It answers the age-old question: are we our brother's keeper? We're a community. We don't look just after ourselves alone. We look after each other. In turn, in so doing, probably the most selfish thing you can do is to try to help somebody out first. It's amazing. It's a very interesting principle. I mean, you get the blessing and you get what you need just from doing that. But sometimes people are very scared. They're afraid of giving. They're afraid of taking a risk. They're afraid of putting out there because some kind of bad or traumatic result. There were tragedies like that. Like my heart goes out to that family of that. And I want to mention this policeman, young policeman, his family was trapped in a basement, filling up with water. He managed
now in New York.
Now in New York.
I don't know the story.
This
What
happened.
happened?
He managed to save all of his family, but he thought his father was trapped down there, so he went back to get his father, who had already escaped earlier. He didn't come back.
Right.
That gets you. And so now the kids are dealing with this trauma flood, and
no daddy.
No daddy. You see, since we don't get too many storms like this, This doesn't happen every day. That's why, and we have each of our own individual response. That's why we have to be on guard. We have to watch. And even though a lot of responses are brand new because we never really had these kinds of things before, we know that whatever is going to come out has some connection to the trauma. We're on hand. Let them have their space. They got to have space, and don't, just be sensitive to where they're at. You see, like these syrupy statements, it's going to be all right, life goes on, we got to pull together. Of course that's true. But you got to go through the process first. And there's much to go through. A new normal here has to be created. It is a long and arduous process.
So what Dr. Sam is
and
saying...
we shouldn't be hard on ourselves
or others.
Or on others if we're taking too long.
Oh, so what Dr. Sam is saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that when tragedy strikes, the worst thing to tell ourselves or other people is, I moved on, you'll move on, it will blow over. Healing, injury, mental or physical, doesn't work that way. You have to work through it in order to move on. Things don't blow over.
You see, that's all very nice, but basically it's sort of an intellectualized rationalization, that stems from denial. They don't want to deal. I mean, if they got in touch, see, people like this, they become like emotional bullies. They'll just discount what you're going through, make you feel inadequate. You're not over it yet?
Right.
It's been a couple of months. What's the matter with you?
Yeah, I know what it's like to have people deny one's reality, which makes the reality 100,000 times worse. And if they just say, yes, it happened, I'm sorry, I don't know what that feels like, but acknowledge you have a reality. When someone denies your reality, because they can't acknowledge at all that something happened or maybe they were involved in it, and you meet a wall of silence. Well, sometimes they meet a wall of water.
Right.
And then they have a reality. I don't deny people's reality. And say, you'll get over it, it didn't happen, you'll move on, it will blow over, which is what I've been hearing in the last year in certain situations. And I'm sorry to be in a position to be able to talk back to those people and say the same thing, that I won't say to you, you'll move on, it will blow over. Because I don't know what you went through, but I know there's an it. And I'm not going to deny it. I'm going to think what I can do to help. Even if what I can do to help is doing nothing. Like Dr. Sam says, you got to give people time who got hit by a tragedy to have the tragedy. Because to consciously do nothing is a choice. Nothing is something.
Well, you're doing something by giving him room.
Right. It's a conscious choice. It's not a block out, I don't want to know, it didn't happen.
Or I don't care.
I don't care.
You do care. You're watching, you're seeing where they're at, you're there. Just like you're watching, like anyone, you're there, and you're there to keep them safe.
Right, and we hope that Mayor Bloomberg and his staff will provide a collective shoulder to cry on. And you need a hug. The mayor and his staff and people in positions of authority at universities and schools will be there.
Even counseling, like
counselors, social workers.
You know what happened?
People just need a hug, just for you to be there. You don't have to say anything. We hope that New Yorkers will be hugging each other and helping each other, and that a situation like this will continue to bring out the best in most people rather than the worst. Dr. Sam, as far as I know, there has been no instances of looting or civil disorder in New York?
No, there have been.
A little bit.
A little bit.
But,
People have been witnessing, but not saying. But what you were saying though about the community thing, I remember when I was at Riverside County, in a residential treatment center, we lost one of our own, one of the staff.
Where's Riverside County? Is that over in California?
Yeah, Riverside County is east of L.A. It's halfway between L.A. and Palm Springs.
That's where you're dealing with the kids who were in extreme circumstances.
In other words, they were kicked out of every foster home that there was. There was at the time, and we were the last line of defense. After us, it's the state hospital, California Youth Authority. At which point, who knows? They don't. They disappear into the ethos somewhere, never to be seen or heard from again. But we lost one of our own staff, and she was beloved. She believe it or not,
She died.
She died in a car accident on her way to a continuing education thing on suicide. It's a strange irony, but she died on the freeway pretty instantly, and we were all traumatized by it. And the county sent in a counselor on the spot. We had like groups. Kind of like a group counseling, and the unit didn't seem the same without her.
Right.
And of course, we had to take care of ourselves and all the rest of it, and you have to release it, and but we were also cautious, and a lot of people her office became like a shrine,
Right.
You see, you don't. But you see, the county needs that office without trying to, without trying to be heartless. That was not my call. But you see, the county. My point is, they came with a group, with a team of counselors, to talk to us, to brief us. People from other units, people who also knew her, joined the group. And so in New York, if they can install, if there is such a way to do it, if they have the resources, because let's face it, people are going to need help,
Okay.
and it's okay. It's
Right.
anything to be ashamed of.
This is my
Nothing.
last question to you before we conclude this session, which is that if I understand what you're saying in New York and the New Yorkers and people in authority as this unfolds and develops is when it's over, and hopefully there will be an it's over
What would be the
date,
fallout, the result?
that no one should say to anyone else, move on, it'll
Right.
blow over, that the only way to do that is a lot of people are going to need a lot of help and help each other. And the last thing to say to anyone is nothing happened, everything's fine, we'll go back to class, we'll go back to work, it will be business as usual. When something like this happens after that,
No,
then
the
you're saying there is no
right.
business
Well,
as
the message you
usual.
want to say is that, look, what happened is probably one of the worst things there is in life. Okay? It is. It's that terrible. We want you to know. Have your space. We're here for you. Whatever happens, whatever you're thinking, whatever trouble, we are here for you. We're here to talk about it. We're here to go through it with you. We're here to, we're on hand to answer any questions or anything that you have to say or do with it. Talk to us. We're here for that.
Dr. Sam, thank you very much for
You're
being
quite
the guest today, and thank you very much for listening and watching.